Last August, President Obama and Congress did something really unusual. They built a fiscal cliff. A cliff as perilous as this one. And they put the U.S. economy on course to go over this cliff at the end of the year, unless they come up with some alternative way to reduce the deficit by $1.2 trillion over the next decade. Well, it's getting closer to the end of the year, and there's no apparent progress towards diverting away from the cliff. Here's what that would mean. Taxes would go up, a lot, for almost everybody. A broad swath of domestic and defense spending would be cut. It would be a huge blow to an already fragile economy, and forecasters say it almost surely would mean renewed recession. You get the point. It's a big deal. But what would it take for us to step away from the cliff? Well, like with any budget, there's the money that comes in and the money that goes out. And when more money goes out than comes in, there's a deficit. I think we make things way too complicated. Let me give you 5 facts about the federal budget, which is pretty much all you need to know. Number 1, in 2011, 63% of all federal spending was on autopilot. The money went out the door without any vote of Congress to pay for promises made in the past to pay Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits for the elderly, Medicaid for the poor, farm subsidies, and of course interest on the federal debt. 63% of the money was committed before Congress even showed up, and they spent the whole year arguing about the other 37%. Number 2, 1 out of every $4 spent today goes towards health care. In 1960, health care was less than 10% of all federal spending. That was before Medicare and before Medicaid. Today it's 25%, and it's on the road over the next decade to hit 33% unless something big changes. Number 3, a lot of people think that what the federal government does is employ a lot of people. Of course they're right. More than 4 million people work for the federal government. But the fact is, if you fired every single one of them, from the Secret Service agent standing next to the president, to the lady who collects tolls at Yellowstone, to the soldiers in Afghanistan, you would have saved $435 billion in wages and benefits last year. That would not have reduced the deficit by even 1/3. The point? Closing down federal agencies can save some money, but not nearly enough to solve the problem. Number 4, we spend a lot of money on defense. $700 billion on defense in 2011. That was 1 out of every $5 the government spent. Our defense budget is now bigger than the defense budgets of the next 17 countries combined. We spend more on defense than China, Britain, France, Russia, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Germany, India, Italy, Brazil, South Korea, Australia, Canada, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Spain, and Israel put together. Number 5. The share of income most American families pay in federal taxes has been falling for more than 30 years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan number cruncher for Congress, in 1981, the middle of the middle class paid 19.2% of their income in income, payroll, and other federal taxes. In 2007, that percentage was 14.3%. So how has the government managed to spend more and more? 1, the rich paid more of the taxes, partly because they made more of the income, and 2, we borrowed. We borrowed 36 cents for every dollar we spent, much of it from abroad. So if you decide how much to spend on benefits, how to slow the growth in healthcare spending, how many employees the government needs, what to do about defense, and how much to tax people, you've pretty much solved the deficit problem. Everything else is detail. Easier said than drawn. So how will this all play out? I've been covering Washington for more than 25 years, and I don't think anybody knows for sure. We talked to 4 experts of different political persuasions to give us some idea about the ways things could go. Congress could call the whole thing off. In fact, if Mitt Romney wins the election, that's probably what they'll do. Delay the fiscal cliff for several months to give the new president a chance to come up with his own budget.
If you have united Republican government, the Republicans will announce the next day, hold your horses, nothing's going to change. We may not be able to change the law until the president's inaugurated, but we're going to go back, extend out for 1 year all of the expiring tax provisions. And then within that year, do tax reform.
Say President Obama is reelected and Congress remains much as it is today, then they could cut a deal that diverts from the fiscal cliff. It might be a real deal with the spending cuts and tax increases that'll significantly dent the deficit, or it could be a phony one that just allows them to call the whole thing off.
I think they must do something. They don't want this fiscal cliff to happen. And the most sensible thing to do is a combination of kicking the can down the road and putting in place a framework for solving the larger problem.
What we need to do is credibly commit to fixed entitlements. And by credibly, I mean credibly. It's got to be something that's in the law and almost impossible to change. And we need to put the U.S. on a sustainable path with really, really big changes to entitlements.
I think there's a greater recognition on the part of even conservatives that the math simply doesn't work to solve this budget problem without more revenue. I think even the liberals have accepted the idea that they're not going to solve this problem with tax increases. And so the conservatives have to meet the liberals somewhere off of the goal line, so to speak.
But there's another possible outcome if President Obama is reelected, and that brings us right back here. We could go over the cliff. Taxes would lurch upwards, spending would be cut blindly. It's not as unlikely as it may seem.
If you have big tax hikes and a big cut in government spending when you're close to recession, I think the cumulative negative impact of all of that all at once would probably be to lop maybe 2 to 4% off of GDP growth next year, and so therefore it would definitely put us in recession.
But if we tumble over the cliff, it doesn't mean that we can't claw our way back up.
They still have a chance to come back and do it in January, and we don't have an immediate catastrophe. I mean, taxes spread out over the year and spending cuts wouldn't all be in January, but it would be a demonstration to the world that the United States was not handling its fiscal affairs, and there was no hand on the tiller.
So how does this all end? What will it take for Washington to move from yammering about the deficit to actually doing something about the deficit? Well, it could take a crisis, perhaps a stock market crash, perhaps an artificial crisis like the fiscal cliff. Or it could take an outbreak of leadership. And I honestly don't know which one is the least likely. I'm David Wessel for the Wall Street Journal.